This is hell.
By definition, a ZAD is a zone to defend, translated from the French. Zone à défendre, it is a militant occupation or anarchist commune with the intent to physically block a development project. And our next guest visited one in France that's fighting to stop an airport. Here to tell us what she saw and did, Pearl Ahrens wrote the Salvage article, A Free Zone Unlike Any Other. Welcome to This Is Hell, Pearl.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
It's great to have you on the show. Pearl studies at University College of London. She went to the ZAD in 2016 and helped 70 carpenters build a hangar. You can follow Pearl on Twitter at Pearl M.R. Ahrens. That's A-H-R-E-N-S. The Guardian reported that this has been taking place now since 2008, but area residents have been opposed to the airport for 50 years. Why are those who have been encamped? Why is the ZAD so opposed to the construction of the airport? And why are the farmers in the area so opposed to the airport?
Well, there's a long tradition in Breton of farmers resisting a state control of the land. The actual land of the ZAD is 1,650 hectares of effectively marshland, but it's extremely fertile because of the amount of water that's there. And there's been farmers there for hundreds of years. The section of land was bought by the state and then sold to a private company who would like to relocate the airport from 50 miles north, near Nantes. There's a kind of tradition in the French left of opposing projects that are large, imposed, and useless. And the airport comes under all three of those categories. So there's been a massive response from all over France, not just in Breton, to support these farmers in opposing the airport project.
Is this kind of strategy to stop development common in France? Is it unique to France? Is this the first? What's the history here of the zone to defend?
This ZAD, Notre-Dame-des-Landes, is the culmination of a long tradition of land struggles in France. So you've got Larzac in the south, which was a campaign against a military base on some more farmland in the 70s. That lasted about 10 years and resulted in a very interesting agreement with the French state. You've got Civent, you've got Notave, which is across the border with Italy. It's against a high-speed rail line. You've got Strasbourg now, so it's like an encampment just on the west side of Strasbourg against the ring road, and various others. Plogoff, so that's a village that was going to have a nuclear power station built next to it. The whole village mobilized against that and they won. So yeah, it's set within a tradition of French land rights resistance, a collaboration between the peasantry and the left more generally, including Notre-Dame-des-Landes, a lot of support from the Nantes left. So protests outside Nantes Town Hall every week have been going on for years and years.
To you, what explains the success that they have had? Why is this such a great strategy in countering development that citizens do not want?
Well, I think it's a tentative success because the state has decided that they're not going to build the airport, which is, I think, remarkable and wonderful that resistance is successful in this way. But because they've been planning this for 50 years, and it does come with conditions on the ZAD, so to not build the airport means that the state will evict the ZAD. So it's not exactly a completely successful method. Basically, there's a convention in French legal tradition that says that no squats will be evicted in the winter months. So that's 1st of October to the 31st of March, which I believe is today. So that's kind of, the tension has been building basically till today. People have been preparing. There was a victory party, which I went to last month, which was amazing, enormous, like 40,000 people celebrating, that they're not going to build the airport, but now the future of the ZAD is in question. So I'd say that it is successful in the sense that it is they say confluence of luttes, which is like convergence of struggles. It's got an extremely broad base across France, Italy, Belgium, even Germany, Switzerland, of environmental activists, militants, farmers, just normal local residents who, or anarchists, kind of crusties, people who all can live in the same place and be accepted and have their way of life and mode of struggle incorporated into a wider resistance. So I think that is a very good way of making a long-standing resistance, is just whether the state will bend to that.
So in January, there was an attempted raid, I believe, on the ZAD in Notre Dame, and 200 to 300 police officers showed up to try to evict them. They were then, the people who were in the ZAD, suddenly people from the neighboring communities came in and supported them. How much do you think that there might be support again tomorrow if the police try to evict them? Or do you think that now that they have accomplished the goal of the airport not being built, that the community may feel like it's time for the ZAD to move on as well?
The mood I got when I was there last month was that the eviction will not happen tomorrow. It will happen at some surprise date in the future. I think the power of the ZAD to mobilize people at short notice is remarkable. If you look back to 2012-13, Operation César was a fully pitched battle against riot cops and, the army even was brought in, and it lasted months and months, and they tried to, starve the Zadistes out, and it didn't work because there was numbers and support from outside. And so I think if there is the will on the ZAD to remain, then it will be able to remain. What the point of that would be is another question, because if it's effectively a village squatted to oppose an airport, and now that aim is not, there anymore, then kind of what's the point?
You're right, the ZAD is a void of ownership, and that's what makes it even more astonishing that the villagers, the Zadistes, successfully fought off all the forces the French state could muster. What do you mean by a void of ownership?
I mean that the French state has ceded control of this land, so even though it's technically under the hands of Vinci, which is the multinational company that owns it, Vinci doesn't really have an in. It doesn't have a stake in this. But at the same time, the people who live there are squatting, and they know they're squatting. And they don't say that they own this land now. They say that they're using it to grow their own food and create their own way of life. So it's not... I'm not sure if I would define it as a commons, in the sense that nobody owns it, but everyone uses it equally, because the communication that I've seen at the ZAD is kind of lacking about how the land is divided up and how it is used between the Zadistes. So I think that there is a void there, but not that that's a bad thing. It's new. But what you've seen in some other struggles is eventually a situation which is unusual in the world develops into some kind of formal agreement with the state. So, like, the people who happen to live there get leased the land for 100 years. That's what happened in the South. And they get to do whatever they like with it. However, that kind of agreement is also opposed by the kind of anarchists who would justifiably not wish to associate themselves in any way with the state. So right now, I don't think that anyone does own this land, although people do use it.
You make this great...
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, you do. We interviewed... Oh, now I'm forgetting her name. We interviewed an author about her book, Extra Statecraft, a couple of years ago, and she was writing about these free zones. And you write, the ZAD's existence casts doubt on the integrity of the French state. The ZAD is a free zone unlike any other. These other free zones are more corporate, are trade zones. Most free zones have a codependent, as you write, relationship with states, whilst the ZAD has a hostile relationship with the French state. The free zones define a new kind of officialdom, whilst the ZAD negates its very existence. Free zones have a friendly relationship with the outside world. The ZAD has a complex relationship with it. Money is paramount in free zones, whilst defense is paramount in the ZAD. So how much do ZADs and free zones cast doubt on the French state? Why not, aren't free zones also challenging the power of the state, undermining the power of the state, even though they are allowed by the state?
Yeah, so you interviewed Keller Easterling.
That's her name. Thank you.
I lifted my format out of her book, basically. It really inspired me, this kind of free zone that isn't the state. You say, people think, everything has to be in a country, right? But what if it's not? And so this free zone, it really, as an idea, it seemed to fit with the ZAD for me, because it is in France, but it doesn't, have the same things that come with being under the jurisdiction of a state. So there isn't, laws and stuff like that. So this piece was kind of intending to note some of the similar, like how does the ZAD fit into this format of a free zone? I think that the other free zones that she describes in her brilliant book, Extra Statecraft, they can undermine the power of a state, but the state does still, you could kind of imagine the state pulling out of that agreement, I think, because there is communication there. There's a formal agreement that the state has, given this bit of land to private ownership. But in the case of the ZAD, it was taken. So the French state now, the ZAD, would kind of have to act in a more aggressive way to take it back than I think if, say, Dubai wanted to change its status, then something more verbal would be arranged. I'm not sure if she would agree, though, Keller.
How much is the difference, then, between free zones and ZADs? That governments allow corporations to run free in free zones, while governments do not want people to run free in ZADs. Is this another example of the growing power of corporations over the state at the expense of giving the people the power over the state? Is this corporations having powers over the state, but people not having power over the state?
Free zones in general? Yeah, I think so. But then there's a great book called, just been published again on Verso, called The ZAD and No TAV, which is a translation by Kristen Ross of a French kind of chronology of the ZAD and the No TAV struggle on the Italian border. And that says that the people is an interesting thing to invoke, because in the case of the ZAD, there was a referendum in summer 2016, and the people of the prefecture of where Notre-Dame-de-Lande is, they decided that they wanted an airport. They voted 55% in favour of the airport being moved. So effectively, they voted against the ZAD. And, they voted in, like, Hollande and Macron, who both oppose the ZAD. So the people is kind of not exactly, I don't think that the Zaddists would say that they represent the people. I think they would say that they were on the side of the environment. So that's a whole new actor in the situation, is the land and the animals who live there and the ability to grow food on that land. So between the state, the people, the land and its representatives, and the corporations, there is still a power struggle on the ZAD, where I think in most other countries, the corporations and the states have kind of won that power struggle.
How much do Zadists see the ZAD as an alternative form of living that is sustainable? And is the ZAD, the anarchist non-state community, put into practice? Is this the community anarchists have been waiting for?
Oh, that's quite a big question. I think it depends what kind of anarchist you are. That's kind of what might be sort of, I hope implying that if you're an anarcho-individualist, you would like it at the ZAD because they don't make you go to meetings. But if you're more into a kind of like communal, collective way of living by default, then the ZAD is somewhat lacking in that. This is just my interpretation. I haven't lived there. I'm sure that people who actually do live there would disagree. But from what I've seen, it's quite difficult to make decisions as a group. So, for instance, the first time I was there, I was building this big hangar with all these carpenters from outside of the ZAD. And the hangar got finished. It was enormous, like, meters and meters long. And they were trying to decide where to put it. And they couldn't decide. This had been, going on all summer, this debate, and they'd had meeting, and they couldn't decide. And then this time, when I went, it was for the victory party last month, and it was a couple weeks after the 17th of January decision, which was the agreement that, the state was going to evict the ZAD, but it was not going to build the airport. And so one of the conditions of them not building the airport was that the Zadis opened up road D281, which they had taken. So this is, imagine, it doesn't show up on Google Maps. You can't plan a route along it. You can't drive along it. The police can't drive along it. It's covered in burnt out cars, cabins. Like it's not really there, this road anymore. So they've taken it and they've kept it for themselves, these Zadists. But one of the conditions of them not building the airport was that the Zadists opened up the road again, which obviously meant that, in theory, the police could come in. And it caused massive tensions, basically, within the ZAD. Only in the last, end of January, beginning of February, there'd been, again, loads and loads of meetings. They decided to open it up again. But then some people who live near the road had gone and dug a big hole in the road so that, a car couldn't drive along it. They'd gone against the decision, and then they decided to set up, as a compromise, like a night watch. So like a 24-hour watch of people standing on the road checking that no police were coming in. However, I think that mainly the farmers on the west side of the ZAD would have liked the road to be opened up a bit sooner because they needed to get their tractors along it. So it is obviously extremely difficult to reconcile people whose main political theory is against the police with people whose main form of living is farming. And they are living in the same place. And they do both have a stake in this road. So I think that making those decisions would require some more organized forms of communication. And so it depends, if you're an anarchist, whether you would like those more organized forms of communication and whether they could be eventually developed at the ZAD, which I think would make it more sustainable.
You're right. The state has tried and will try again to evict the ZAD, but mainly leaves it alone, which suggests that the state cannot, for the time being, recognize the land of the ZAD as under its jurisdiction. The ZAD's organization or disorganization of land can thus be read as a denial of the state being the ultimate expression of the people's will. Is the ZAD then more than a challenge to an airport or whatever any ZAD is challenging any kind of development project? More than that, is the ZAD a denial of the state and a challenge, a successful challenge at times, to state power?
Yeah, I think it is. I think part of the reason that it inspires people so much, you hear so many stories of people, I've met them at the ZAD and they go, oh, I just came to visit and I ended up staying. I've been here 2 years now. because it is an extraordinary way of living. It's quite DIY and free. There's not really laws. You can grow whatever you like, if you catch my drift. And so I think it does kind of give people another option, which is outside of the norm, and that in itself is quite inspiring. Also, the reason that it has lasted so long is because it's absorbed a lot of energy from the Breton nationalist movement. So if you think, say, maybe like Cornwall, there's some Cornish I don't know if you know about Cornwall in England, there's a kind of Cornish nationalist movement that is kind of slightly passé now, but they want independence from the rest of the country, and so they are obviously anti-state, and in that sense, the ZAD has kind of provided a vessel for a lot of Breton anti-state activists to kind of converge around. So it is quite, it's got a lot of people involved that I think wouldn't necessarily otherwise have got involved.
And you're right. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's quite
I'm sorry. You also write that the utter ideological void of the ZAD is such that the contradiction is not out of place in and actually forms part of the discourse of the ZAD. The ZAD can be conceptualized as an exercise in pure dissensus, that is, widespread defense. To what degree, then, is a ZAD an incubator for dissent, for a different type of lifestyle? That is, how much does it create an environment for the care and protection of, rather than premature babies, premature or even maturing dissenting ideas?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it's an experiment and a laboratory for a new way of living. It does, in a remarkable way, kind of fuse everyday life with struggle. So it's not just by being there, just by living there, you are doing something that is out of the norm and that is resisting the state. By growing food, you're creating something in a place that would otherwise be covered in concrete. I've heard that quite a few times, that it's kind of inventive in that way. But they're also limited by the fact that it's the countryside. So, everyone, you've got to work with what's there. It's not a city. You haven't actually got that many people. There's 200 people that live there. So they haven't got that much infrastructure. They drive around in cars all the time. There's not paved roads. So you can only go so far from normality or from, the capitalist mode of production before you hit some barriers, I think. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Pearl, one last question for you. We have been speaking with Pearl Ahrens. She wrote the Salvage article, A Free Zone Unlike Any Other. Pearl studies at University College of London. She went to the ZAD in 2016 and helped 70 carpenters build a hangar. You can follow Pearl on Twitter at Pearl M.R. Ahrens. That's A-H-R-E-N-S. For all of our guests, our final question is the question from hell, the question we hate to ask, you might hate to answer. Our audience is going to hate your response. You write, the ZAD protects itself from the future. Its almost survivalist discourse rejects infrastructure as an unwelcome imposition to the Zadist's vaguely defined freedom. Infrastructure here means bus services, postal services, centralized electricity grids, sewage pipes, and standardized forms of exchange. Apart from the running water and the few paved roads, which Zadists accept as necessary, there's an active hostility toward developed forms of organization, as if the Zadists are resisting modernity entering through the soil. Are Zadists Luddites?
No, not at all.
How would you distinguish them from Luddites, then?
Luddites, it was a union, right? So they wanted to keep their jobs against technology that was going to replace them. But if you're talking about the job of the people of the ZAD as a farmer, there is a battle going on between the Zadistes on, technological farming versus organic and non-organic farming and GMO and animals, because there's a lot of vegans, but there's also a lot of cows. But I don't think that's really prominent. I think what you mean is, are they survivalists and do they hate technology? I would say no. I would just say that their discourse is located too far into the realm of consumption and they haven't thought enough about production. So if you're saying ZAD partout, which means ZAD everywhere, they want the whole world to be like a ZAD, I would love that. But, how would we make things? Because, the petrol that you need for your cars is obviously dug out of the ground by one of the companies similar to the one that they're opposing. So it would require a longer term and more thought than just squatting every piece of land that you would like to.
Pearl, thank you so much for being on our show. Thank you for giving us a tour of the ZAD. I really appreciate it. Again, that's Pearl Ahrens. She wrote the Salvage article, A Free Zone Unlike Any Other. Thank you so much for being on our show this week.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a This Is Hell interview. For more interview hell and to support the show, visit thisishell.com.